We are now up to Dr. Alan Woodley and Matt Dyer. So Dr. Alan Woodley from Queensland University Technology and Matt Dyer from Queensland Fire Department, who will be presenting their project on managing earthquake risk unreinforced masonry building databases. Thank you. Over to you, Matt.
Thank you, Dr. Allison.
Oh, there you go. That one forward, that one back.
Thank you. You know, in Australia, when we think about earthquakes, we probably think about Newcastle in 1989. 13 people died. Buildings were destroyed and the National Building Code was found wanting and changes were made. And we heard from Dr. Tom this morning and we watched those sorts of stories and we think, thank goodness, I'm not a Kiwi. And we might be lulled into a false sense of security sometimes, thinking, oh, earthquakes, they happen, but maybe I don't need to be too worried in Australia. I'm a reformed disaster manager and I worry about everything. So we had that earthquake up at Kilkiva not so long ago. And that might be, oh, yeah, just remind us again, oh, maybe earthquakes are a thing. Maybe they're a thing. And they are a thing for us to think about. And of course, as a fire department, not just in Queensland, but across Australia, we take earthquakes very seriously. Our officers are the ones, our men and women will be the ones that go into these events, even as the buildings are still falling, even as aftershocks are still rocking the communities that have been so badly impacted. So we take it seriously. And of course, earthquakes are a real problem because we get no warning. Let's go, boom, earthquake. And, we might tell our communities, drop, cover and hold on. But of course, our emergency services, they're doing the opposite. They're running into those things to save lives. So this project that we're about here today is really about trying to help us understand what is going to fall down. And the project focuses on unreinforced masonry buildings. They fall down a lot. On the slide here behind me, oh, I didn't forward the slide, there you go. On the slide here, we can see this is Newcastle. And some of our men and women who go into these earthquakes and travel around the world doing it. And the table there gives us a sense for the types of buildings that fall down. And when we get an earthquake of around, what was Newcastle? It was a 5.4. Gosh, that seems hardly significant. 5.4, remember, 13 people died. Buildings fell down. Unreinforced masonry buildings, the big problem. So our project here is to create a publicly accessible database of unreinforced masonry buildings across Australia. That's a lot of buildings. How are we going to do that? We've got a bit of a time and motion study we did, and I've got Dr. Jane Sexton in the room and Natalie and Carol, my colleagues from Fire Department who's done this work not so long ago, where we put bodies out in motion out in those communities. In about 12 communities in Queensland, we eyeballed buildings that might be unreinforced masonry building. And other disaster managers in the room here, I know Mark Ryan's here, we've got Mike Tate here, we've got a colleague, many other colleagues here. We've done that. We've walked our community streets and said, crikey, that could come down, that parapet's probably risky. I hope we don't get an earthquake at morning tea time. This project is going to use very clever neural networks to try and understand imagery that Google has taken to use that type of AI to tell us where unreinforced masonry buildings are in our communities in Australia. I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Dr. Alan Woodley from QUT. He's the brains, his team are the brains behind this work. I just get to talk about the cool stuff that other people do. Dr. Alan, I'll hand over to you, sir.
Okay, so I'm in place of Hosan. He's like the godfather of this project. I'm just the muscle. We can see here, so we already have some scattered databases. They have two main limitations. So one of them is the fact that they are just located in like big cities, essentially. So either we get the capital cities or we get like high risk cities such as Newcastle. The other problem with them is the fact that they are all very different. So we get, in some cases, we can get the regions like we have there in Hobart. Sometimes we get the building footprints. So they kind of give us an overhead area of the building, so length and widths. And in other cases, we just get some X and Y coordinates. So they're all very dispersed, and it's hard to kind of get all of these because they're all taken using foot surveys. So it's hard to scale from, say, a city up to a state or a country. Okay. So the aim of this project is to solve both of those issues. So the first thing we want to go through is get a consistent geodatabase. So we want to make sure we get not just the XY location, but the footprint of the building, so we can get the actual area of the buildings themselves. And we also want to look at the scalability of the issue here. So what we're going to do is we're going to use some computer vision and some AI models, and that will enable us to go through not just looking at individual cities, but we can scale it up to those larger areas. And the end result is to feed into a risk framework. So it's only a small part of the risks framework, but it is a very important part. So these are some of the unreinforced masonry buildings. So we can see we can identify these buildings in comparison to other type of more modern buildings. So the good thing is if we can identify them, so can a computer vision model. And you can see here there's numerous types. Here we've listed 6. They can have another one that goes up to 9. And for these, you can see that most of them are just the height of the building, so how many stories they have. And there are other ones there that look at the more of a cultural side of them, so looking at churches. And I'll come back to these ones. So this summarizes the automated detection workflow. So what we're going to do, we get the geographical X and Y and Z, and from them then we can gather some street view images from Google. So this saves us going across and making a bunch of the foot visits, and we can just take the images from Google. From then, we can also look at some remote sensing images. So these are images captured usually through satellites, but you can also get overhead images. And so once we get the street view images, we're going to use some labeled data for that, and then we can go and we can get some new data that we're getting from Google, and then we can identify the new buildings that could be affected. We can then use their XY coordinates to get identify the individual buildings, and that will give us then the X, Y, and the areas, and then we can use them, feed them into the risk framework by developing the GIS polygons, and so then we can estimate both the area and the height of the buildings. So we've just started this project, but we do have some previous data. So this data will be used to, we're going to what we call retraining a model, and then we can process some new information when it comes into it. So we're going to use a model which is called a convolutional neural network. It's pretty complex in terms of saying it, but what it is based on technology that essentially tries to format how a brain would work. And convolutional neural networks, they're a newer version of neural networks that have existed for decades. CNNs have only existed for about the past 10, 15 years, but they're very well entrenched in research. They started out looking at images. They're very good at looking at things like, say, boundaries, but then they've gone and proceeded to look at things like text and videos and audio. So we've got about 3,000 buildings that we've identified. So we know these buildings are where they are located, and we know what they look like. So we can use that information inside our CNN, and we can then go and use our Google Photos and Street View to then look at some other new buildings. And then the final stage is we'll be able to use some polygons here. So we can see these are different looking buildings, and we want to try and verify them. So we're going to use some information from the Microsoft Maps. And so we can see here that we need to look and make sure that the polygons that we're producing are actually corresponding to some different buildings. There's some other options we've looked at, but we tend to find that the stuff we're getting from Bing is probably the best. We'll look at another 2 or 3. In terms of both where they're located, we found that's where the most information was that's more useful for us. So as I said, the main reason we're doing this is very much like industry, or in terms of government focus. It's not just something that we want to do in a lab and kind of write a paper and just put it into like a library. We do want to focus it in. The main things are either looking at different scenarios that could happen, so we can assist the fire departments and police departments and ambulance, but also we also aim to try and make it if there's going to be in a actual live scenario. Okay, I'll hand it back.
Thanks, Alan. It's amazing how lucky one gets when one surrounds themselves with smart people. And I'm very fortunate to be surrounded by so many smart people on a general basis. On the screen there now, it just reiterates the fact that we're not immune to earthquakes in our state of Queensland here. That's a lot of earthquakes, and they're just the ones above 0.2. You know, each year we're probably getting 100 or so earthquakes. You just don't feel most of them. Some of those you might have felt. The picture in the middle there is what we call a shake map. It's supposed to imagine, this is a fair income scenario, by the way, from our colleagues at Geoscience Australia, where any single one of us can go on and pull out some plausible scenarios for earthquakes and plug them into our planning, plug them into our exercises. So there's a fair income bit of tool there. So we've taken one here for a plausible scenario that might occur within Cooee of Brisbane here. Poor old Ipswich really cops the epicentre there, I suppose. And so we're using information that Alan will create for us to see, in that scenario, for an exercise, say, where are our pain points going to be? So that's for an exercise. You can see how we could use this in real life. We get alert that there's an earthquake happen. How do we know? We might have felt it. That might be our first thing. Our next port of call is, okay, where are we likely to get buildings damaged? Already our officers, our first responders, though they're communities, they already probably got a sense where the pain is. This puts some science in behind it. So we're very excited to imagine that as a part of our kit bag as first responders, emergency services, providing services to those communities. You know, I'll just end up when we think about earthquake risk in Queensland and scenarios. It's really good to test ourselves with scenarios. You know, probabilistically, we might only ever get, say, a category, a magnitude 6 or something like that. Maybe probabilistically we might say that. But here's what's true about probabilities as well. If you hang around long enough, all things exist with equal reality. So that's why I say we should test ourselves maybe a little bit above and beyond where we think might be plausible scenarios. And fortunately, our friends in Hollywood do that sometimes for us. And that's the bottom picture, of course, from that great documentary, San Andreas. I mean, a fun movie. And of course, all emergency managers look just like The Rock. Isn't that true? But look, that does wrap us up. You can see how we're going to use this information in real time, fair income, to make our emergency response better, to make our preparations better. And you know what the last point about this? We can use this to enhance our recovery as well. We can think about recovery just as scientifically, just as well prepared as we do for our prevention, our preparedness and response activities. This is the sort of stuff that we're getting to do. And how cool? Convolutional neural networks. Huh, who knew? Thank you, everybody. Any questions?
All right, there are a couple. Can this model identify building heights?
So like if we're just starting out, but probably because of the Google photos, we can probably estimate the heights of them just from those photos. We can also possibly look at some other information sources. So with satellites, they have a thing called LiDAR, and so they allow us to measure heights. So we could be using those as well.
How dense are these types of buildings in city or town areas when compared with houses in cyclone and wildfire-prone areas?
Sorry, Alison, how dense are the
buildings in cities and towns, I think, in when you're comparing, say, houses in cyclone and wildfire-prone areas?
I don't have an answer for that one, but here's what we do know. Building codes have improved a lot since early 1990s as a thank you to Newcastle and their dreadful experiences there. We also know as you head further north, say from about Woodgate north, the cyclone categories change for building codes. That actually offers us a bit of resilience as well. It's not a straight shot answer for that question. I don't quite have an answer for that one, but there are some factors that weigh into that answer.
Another one. Bridges are really vulnerable to earthquake shaking, and we need them to get response staff to building collapses. What work is being done in that space, if you know of any?
Look, again, it's, for emergency services, planning for response is everything. I had the good fortune of being out at our Queensland Fire Department training grounds out at the Port of Brisbane a month or so ago, watching as our emergency services practice for these exact sorts of events. So the practice is in place for response, and those officers are amazing. And I can tell you, it's not just men and women rushing in where angels are fear to tread. It's planned, it's coordinated. They're taking amazing equipment and skills with them, ranging from what they breathe to how they brace buildings. So there's carpentry and engineering as well as emergency services. And I think the last thing I'd say, I think a lot of, say bridges, if you go for a drive across, I think the main bridge across the freeway here, and you look at where the deck of the bridge sits on the pylons, you might see the big things that can wobble. They help absorb the shaking of the building. So there is some resilience already built into our critical infrastructure. I think that was actually a retrofit probably in Brisbane maybe 15 or 20 years ago maybe that occurred, and I think it's made its way into standard practice.
Hi, Kate here. Thank you for your really interesting conversation. I have a question about the transference of risk and accountability, and curious about your consultation with stakeholders. If you're doing this work that's going to identify buildings that are higher risk of collapse, does the risk transfer to the building owner then to strengthen that structure in case of the worst case scenario?
What a great question, Kate. Someone earlier today said, once you see something, you can't unsee it. So that's the first thing I guess we've got to do. If we accept a level of risk from an earthquake hazard and we identify that certain types of structures are more at risk, then I guess the next thing is we have to share that information. So then the next part is, what are they got to do about that? I guess the first thing is if they're within the existing building code of the area, within the planning guidelines for that local government area, I think first one, they may have acquitted that. Now, this is not legal advice, I should say. This is me thinking with my disaster manager's hat on, what do I do? And I've had to do this a lot of times, mainly around storm surge or flooding or things of that nature. You have to share that information with them and provide options. We talked about earlier on today, there are programs in place by the government right now that funds resilience to buildings. I think we've had a cyclone program not so long ago, and bushfire resilience programs have come and gone as well. So that's where we can. We try and link our citizens up, our homeowners, our property owners up with those sorts of resources where they can. That would be the start. The next part becomes a more political process of I guess, what am I trying to say here? Advocacy.
Thank you, Matt and Alan.
Thank you.